On behalf of the Roman Catholic Church for the abuse of the indigenous children at church-run residential schools.
As 1,300 unmarked graves have been discovered at several boarding schools across the country since 2021.
Today is International Orange Shirt Day,
a day to honor the lost children of Indian residential schools.
Traumatic legacy boarding schools have created on Native American communities.
It was a national policy to take Indian children, to beat their native language out of them.
Pope Francis began a tense visit to Canada on Sunday to apologise to Indigenous peoples for abuses committed by missionaries in residential schools there. It's a key step in the Catholic Church's efforts to reconcile with Native communities and help them heal after generations of trauma. The Pontiff landed in Edmonton late on Sunday morning for the first leg of his 6-day trip. He will also visit Quebec City and Iqaluit, the capital of the Nunavut territory.
It's a pilgrimage, first of all, but he qualified it further, and he talked about it as a penitential pilgrimage. He is deeply seized by the fact that terrible things have happened in the past, perpetrated in many cases by people who were representative of the Church.
Some 150,000 Indigenous children were forced to attend these institutions, and according to Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, many were physically and sexually abused.
I work with Indigenous nations to investigate areas around residential school sites using technologies such as ground-penetrating radar to try to find possible locations of the unmarked graves of children who died while at the school or who never came home. And
tonight I'm going to tell you about a global scandal. It is about the Vatican and its predator priests. For years now we have heard about and read about this, dismissed it as a remote story. But abusive Catholic priests are everywhere. And I'm not making a sweeping statement. I have 3 stories to share with you. The Catholic Church in England and Wales ignored close to 3,000 cases of child sex abuse. 3,000, you heard that right. In America, the former Archbishop of Washington, D.C. sexually abused minors. And in France, an ambassador of the Vatican molested 4 men. It does not end there. Over the course of the next 10 minutes, we will describe the extent of the crisis in the Church, how countries across the world have reported cases of sexual abuse against priests, and how a wall of secrecy protects these predators. This is our cover story tonight. Let me start with the most damning report that has come from the UK. This is about Cardinal Vincent Nichols, the head of the Roman Catholic Church in England and Wales. He is being accused of hiding paedophile priests. The United Kingdom conducted an independent inquiry into child sexual abuse. That report is out, and the details are shocking. The inquiry looked into complaints from 1970, in fact, to 2015. And in this period, the Church received more than 3,000 complaints. 3,000 complaints of child sexual abuse in the UK. The complaints were against more than 900 individuals connected to the Church. More than 1,750 victims and complainants were involved. What did the Church do? It brushed all these complaints under the carpet. In fact, they covered up the entire scandal. When someone complained against a priest, they would move the priest to another parish. without any supervision, without any probe or corrective measures. Some of these priests continued to prey on children. And in all these years, the Archbishop did nothing, including Cardinal Vincent Nichols. He inherited this problem from his predecessors. He did nothing to fix it. Instead, he became a part of it. He tried to suppress new cases. The inquiry found that since 2016, more than 100 allegations of abuse have been reported. What did Pope Francis do about this? Again, nothing. Yes, the Pope too was aware of what was going on in the UK. Reports say Pope Francis asked Cardinal Vincent Nichols to stay on, despite a report that criticized the Cardinal's leadership. The findings were clear as water. The Church was prioritizing its reputation over protecting children. And the Pope looked the other way. What's worse is that this is not a one-off case. The same story repeats in different countries with different priests. Let me tell you our second story. It's about a disgraced former cardinal. The Archbishop of Washington, Theodore E. McCarrick. He molested a 16-year-old way back in 1971. That case was covered up. And instead of being punished, this cardinal was promoted. Did the Vatican not know about his abusive ways? Of course they did. Pope John Paul II, the previous pope, gave him a promotion even when there were persistent complaints against McCarrick. Pope Francis faces the same charge. But in 2018, he ordered an investigation against McCarrick, a welcome step, but a much delayed one. This probe came more than 45 years after the first case of abuse and more than 2 decades after the first complaint.
The McCarrick report is remarkable because it points to failings by a succession of popes, particularly John Paul II and Benedict XVI.
Pope Francis making a historic trip to Western Canada Monday, greeted with ceremony before delivering a historic apology to the Indigenous people in the capital city of Alberta.
I humbly beg forgiveness for the evil committed by so many Christians against the Indigenous peoples.
The Pope atoning for abuses by Catholic missionaries at Indigenous residential schools for nearly 150 years.
To remember the devastating experiences that took place in the residential schools hurts, angers, causes pain, and yet it is necessary.
From the late 1880s through the mid-90s, officials say 150,000 children were forced to attend the schools. The aim to assimilate Indigenous children into Canadian culture by stripping them of their heritage and their languages and separating them from their families.
You listened deeply and with great compassion to the testimonies that told of the way our languages were suppressed, our culture taken from us, and our spirituality denigrated.
And wounds reopened just last year when nearly 1,000 sets of human remains were found on the grounds of some of those schools. The Pope paying his respects at a cemetery and meeting with survivors.
My name is Marcia Small. That's my American name. And my Northern Cheyenne name is Odette V. Navat. Let's do this. It's kind of a heavy day for me. Well, every day is a heavy day every time I'm working in the cemetery anyway.
Today is International Orange Shirt Day.
A day to honor the lost children of Indian residential schools.
Traumatic legacy boarding schools have created on Native American communities.
We are going to Chimawa. It's the oldest working Indian boarding school in the United States. The fact that there are cemeteries at these schools, just saying it just sounds weird, right? My responsibility is finding children that are in these cemeteries. Without this healing, I don't think that America itself can heal. People don't like to learn the ugly America. They want the America, the beautiful.
I call the boarding school era one of America's best kept secrets. Boarding school and the legacy of boarding school has impacted every Native family.
It was a national policy to take Indian children, to beat their native language out of them, to remove them from their families so they wouldn't have that cultural teaching. It's that bad.
A school in some old army barracks in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. When they arrived at boarding schools, their hair was immediately cut. Some had kerosene put in their hair, and they said it burned. They were given uniforms. They had to work half a day in the kitchen, in the laundry room, work in the fields that they didn't get paid for. The corporal punishment was pretty horrendous. Boarding school survivors tell of kids being taken away and disappearing and never being seen again. They just saw these kids that they weren't even human. They saw them as savages. My father attended Chemawa boarding school from 1925 to 1929. He was stolen. He was 9 years old and put on a train 3 days and 3 nights to Chemawa, Oregon. He always said, compared to boarding school, the Army was a piece of cake. How did any of these kids survive these hellholes called boarding schools?
There's a lot of little spirits in this building.
You can,
yeah.
Do you all feel that? You can feel it. You feel it, and you walk lightly.
Events that never left Smalls or her ancestors, represented by the empty chair.
My hearing was totally destroyed by my grade 5 teacher, and I was sexually molested here by a priest.
She received a
Morning, we have new information on the Trump administration's impact on families trying to cross the U.S. southern border. Lawyers say they cannot find the parents of, listen to this number, 545 children after they were separated at the border. The children are now in U.S. custody, and some of them have not seen their parents in more than 3 years. Maria Villarreal reports on the efforts to track them down.
In the ACLU filing, lawyers say of the 1,030 separated migrant children, they still haven't been able to reach parents for 545 kids. And roughly 2/3 of those parents are believed to have been deported to their countries of origin. The children in question were separated before the Trump administration